Support for the Living Wisdom podcast is provided by InTouch Pharmaceuticals, a long-term care pharmacy committed to meeting the specialized pharmaceutical needs of their clients. Visit intouchpharma.com.
All right, raise your hand if you feel like caregiving is a burden. I felt those shoot up, didn't you? You could just feel it, right?
Absolutely.
And that's what we're talking about in this series, caregiving, with this focus. And what we're focusing on now is a little bit of a survival master plan to give you some tools, tips and tricks, if you will, how-tos, what to do when it comes to caregiving, because wow, it's hard. It's hard. Your personal life really takes a back seat during this.
It becomes totally disrupted.
Yeah.
You know, so many times what's so difficult at the beginning of this journey is all of a sudden the reality is sitting in front of you that all the things that you always planned your life to be at this point in time, all the things that you feel like you've worked for and focused on are all now not a possibility from your perspective. And that's a lot to lose in one fell swoop.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, dealing with the reality of what that diagnosis means for your loved one.
Right.
And how that's going to happen. And so it is such a terrifying and anxiety-producing kind of situation when you get that news. And so really what we're trying to do is to help people say, okay, how do I move past that?
Yeah.
How do I start to understand it? How do I make it manageable? Basically, how do I survive this?
How do I get through this? Because we have talked about grief in previous episodes,
Right.
and it's not just grief with a diagnosis.
No.
It's grieving, as we've mentioned, it's grieving your loved one, that time.
Yeah.
That time that you had to sit down for dinner or that intimate time, that emotional connection that you have. Grieving that undivided attention from your kids and those soccer games, right?
Yeah.
That grieving of when you thought life was hard, it just got harder. You're grieving the simpler life that you have. There's so much loss, and you know, I feel like I've said this before, and it's hard when you're going through it. But how lucky are we to love someone so much that you're willing to take on this burden?
Absolutely.
And that's a hard thing to think about, right?
Yeah.
But a priest said that to me once, and it's just really stuck with me. How lucky are you to love someone so much that you are willing to take this on? It's not easy. And you were talking to me a little bit about this change versus transition.
Yeah.
And before you told me what that meant off camera, I was like, what? Is it not the same? It's not the same.
No,
so
it's not.
so what is change, and then what is transition?
So change is when something happens that is external, something that's outside yourself, something you have no control over. For example, my husband's been diagnosed with dementia. Okay, that is a change, a very significant change. It's something that you had no ability to control, nor did you have any choice about it. It is something that occurred, and now it's here in front of us. Transition now is how emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, how that change, whatever that is, now impacts you and your ability to embrace the reality of that change.
Gotcha.
And oftentimes for caregivers, transition is happening in phases. It's not like, boom, I flip a switch and you've been transitioned now and openly are embracing whatever this change is. That's not how it happens. People work through it progressively and work through it in different phases. And how long that transition takes, what that transition looks like is different for individuals. But what we really want to talk about is what are those transitions, what do they look like, and then ultimately how can I help myself move through those in the least traumatic way as possible so I can continue to be who I feel like I need to be for my loved one.
So naturally I'm thinking people don't like change.
Yeah.
So that probably right there brings on a lot of emotions. This isn't just obviously the emotions of the diagnosis and the reality of that, but then we're just going to keep going through this emotional pattern with those changes.
And you know, it's very normal. It's kind of like when you think about how people have talked in the past about the C word, and somebody gets that cancer diagnosis. You know, your mind automatically goes through a series of things that you've heard, things that you know people have experienced when they get that diagnosis. It's no different with dementia. Somebody gets that diagnosis that mom, dad, my husband or my wife has been diagnosed with dementia. It's absolutely normal for people to go through these extreme anxiety-ridden emotional responses as you all of a sudden are trying to wrap your mind around all those things when you hear that word dementia that you think about and go, oh no, now this is going to happen, now this is going to happen, now this is going to happen. And so it's a very normal response that initially we're just all in shock, right?
Yeah.
And it's just trying to, you know, move past that initial shock, and then where do we go from there, kind of thing.
So change is inevitable, but the transition is the part we can control, right? So it's almost no longer focusing on the changes. You know the changes are coming, but it's focusing on how we deal with that transition.
Correct. So change is something, it's a new reality, it's something that happened, it's something I can't change or control, right? And transition is really about making a choice about how you're now going to deal with what this change is that you can't alter, that you have no control over. So when we talked about the fact that people who go through, and any change, it doesn't matter, it doesn't have to be dementia, in our lives in general, any change that happens is going to trigger this emotional response of now putting us into a situation where we have to transition through the process to embrace whatever that change is that's in front of us. So when we're talking about, you know, these different phases, so the first phase that people generally experience is what we call the phase of endings, okay? And so when we talk about a phase of endings, we're talking about the reality of processing through things psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, that can bring you to the process of understanding it's time to let go of what was.
Okay.
You know, when you get that diagnosis of dementia, there's all these things that we have planned for our life. There's all these things that we planned for our future together. You know, time that we were going to spend and how we were going to spend it. So initially when you get that diagnosis, it's like the reality sets in that all of that has changed now. And so that in itself is going to trigger this whole process of, oh my gosh. And so that initial phase of endings is about starting to understand the reality that there are going to be things in your life that you have to let go. That you have to let go of all of the what was, all the what was for your life and what that was going to look like, all the what was in terms of who your loved one is and how their sense of reality is, how they walk through life with you, and how do they now relate or communicate with you. All of that is being altered. So there's lots of things in that initial phase of endings that you kind of have to come to terms with and process through to get to the point where you can just now let go of the what was, if you will. So that second part of the transition is what we call the phase of wilderness, or sometimes I'll refer to it as no man's land.
Yeah,
right?
It's like, what now?
Yeah, exactly. And so when you get to that phase of wilderness, that piece of the transition, what's happening is you're in that kind of awkward feeling that you just verbalized. Is like, holy cow, now if this isn't going to happen, what is going to happen? Okay?
What does it even look like?
Yeah, and it's that time between letting go of what was and the old, and trying to figure out, okay, what is my new normal? What is that new thing that I'm going to need to embrace? And so it's kind of that process. When we talk about that phase of wilderness, it's kind of that process of letting yourself come to terms emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, with what that new normal is going to be, or what that looks like. And then ultimately, you hopefully are going to, transition through these phases to now the phase that we call new beginnings.
Right.
And that's when you start to let yourself understand and embrace what that new normal looks like, and what does that mean for me. And so it's really making that transition, and it takes, I cannot emphasize enough how much courage and strength and love it takes for a caregiver to make that transition of letting go what was and fully embracing what is, and understanding that this reality now that is sitting in front of me, this is what my life is. This is what our relationship is. Not what it was, but what it is.
And then finding joy in that, right?
And
that's hard.
That's very hard, because there's so much emotional roller coaster that you go through on this, and there's so much underlying trauma and grief that happens when you're going through that transition and all those phases of letting go of what was and embracing what is. And you get lost in all of that motion, and it's really hard sometimes to find those moments of joy in the midst of all of that.
I think also what you've said in the past too is when you hear dementia, your loved one has dementia, you immediately, that's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Our life is over.
And so instead of throwing in the towel or like throwing your hands up like there's no joy, everything's done, like you said, it's working through this transition, finding a new normal that is extremely different than what you thought, but knowing that with that new normal comes joy. It's going to be hard, but there come these
there are
points
good
of joy.
Moments, right. So first of all, the first thing that we tend to do that sets us up for failure is that we start to walk in and accept this new role as caregiver, expecting ourselves to know everything there is to know and to be perfect at everything we do. Of
course.
And you just are not going to survive this journey with those kinds of expectations. It's just not realistic. So one of the things that you have to kind of process through with yourself is to understand we're going to make mistakes. And when you make a mistake, take that opportunity to go, oh, well, that didn't work real well. So maybe next time I'll do it this way. Okay?
Yeah.
We have a tendency as human beings to want to think in this all or nothing kind of scenario.
Perfection, pass or fail. Exactly.
Yes. And that there's no gray area here. There's no opportunity to learn it or do it differently.
Yeah.
So the first thing I would say to all caregivers out there is, give yourself a break and look at when those things happen where you didn't do it so well, or the way you wasn't real effective for your loved one. Take that, seize that as an opportunity to go, oh, okay. Well, now I learned the next time this happens how to do something different.
Yeah.
And so much of what we do with caregivers, as caregivers, is kind of this trial and error process. And I tell people all the time, understand your loved one is your greatest teacher.
Yeah.
Okay, that person is going to be how you learn what works and what doesn't work, what's effective for them and what's not effective for them. Stop creating in your mind that scenario where if I fall down, I tend to think to myself, oh man, I am never going to be able to do this right. I can't do anything right.
Oh, wow.
I'm never going to be able to be enough for this person I'm taking care of. And you can't do that. You will destroy yourself in the process.
Yeah.
And your loved one will suffer greatly because you cannot, when you have that mindset, be who that person needs you to be.
Yeah.
So you've got to look at it from this perspective of, okay, this one thing went south.
Yeah.
But the reality is it was one thing that went south. It wasn't everything you've ever done as a caregiver that was bad.
Right.
There are lots of good things, but sometimes we go through this process where we allow ourselves that, this mindset and this attitude that everything has to be perfect or nothing is good.
Yeah.
And
then also finding the good in those mistakes because they're going to happen, right?
Right.
You gave a story the other day which really made me laugh and smile of someone going through dementia, dumping everything out of all the cabinets.
Right.
And yes, that feels like a loss, right? When you walk in and you're thinking, oh gosh, now I have to clean all this up. But there's a little bit of humor in this.
Right.
It's like that's a time to take and say, all right, next time.
And it's looking past the actual act to what was the intent behind it. In that story it was, that this gentleman heard his wife make a comment about she needed to have the time to clean out her kitchen cabinets.
Yeah.
Well,
he did it.
He did it. Middle of the night, got up, took everything out, dumped everything out on the kitchen counter. But the intent was he was trying to be helpful.
Yeah, it was love.
So it's changing that frame of mind from, oh my gosh, look at this mess he made. Now I'm going to have to take the time to clean up. To, oh my gosh, he loved me so much that he wanted to do this thing for me.
Yeah.
And that's hard when you're in the midst of, oh, this is one more thing I got to deal with.
Cleaning, cooking, making sure everything's running, making sure they're at appointments.
Exactly.
It's like this.
And it's difficult to find the joy, but that's what's critical to your survival and your success in all of this is to be able to jump on and grab those moments of joy in the midst of what this journey looks like and feels like.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, don't let yourself get caught up in the lie that it's always going to be this way. When something's difficult, when something goes south, when something isn't effective that you say or do, understand it's temporary.
Yeah.
This too shall pass.
Yeah.
Now, I don't mean to imply that all those challenges, all those difficulties are going away. I'm not saying that at all. This is a very challenging, difficult journey. But you got to live it moment by moment. I tell people all the time, sometimes we try to look at the whole journey in one glance, and you can't do that.
No.
That old adage that you got to eat the elephant one bite at a time. And that's so true when it comes to caregiving.
It's like, let's just make it to lunch.
That's exactly right. Take it an hour to hour sometimes. That's all you can do.
Interesting. And here you say other people's opinions are not facts.
Mm-hmm.
Talk a little bit about that. Do people love to chime in on these scenarios?
Yeah.
Is that what you see?
So sometimes it's easy for people who are on the outside of the situation and aren't living it 24/7 like you are as a caregiver. It's really easy for other people to give you their opinion. If you can probably relate to this in terms of being a first-time mom.
Yeah.
How many people try to give you advice about how to take care of your, child, and it's wonderful that people care about you and they want to give you advice.
Delivery may not be great,
right? But understand that it's their opinion and that's all it is.
Yeah.
Don't allow other people's opinions about how you should do something.
Yeah.
Or if it was me, I'd do it this way kind of thing, right?
Well, I'd love to take Thursday off.
Yeah.
You're in.
Yeah, exactly. So, people want to offer advice, and again, that's wonderful that people care, but understand it's just opinion. If you want help, if you want direction, if you want education, if you want support, go to the people who are experts.
Right, exactly.
Don't allow other people's opinions to drive how you do things, or how you feel about yourself. Because when everybody's giving you opinions about how you should do something, and that's not how you're doing it, what message does that send to you?
You're failing.
I'm failing.
Not doing it right.
I'm not doing it right.
Your loved one's suffering.
Somehow I'm failing.
Right.
There is no right or wrong way to do this. When you're walking this journey, it is strictly about helping yourself understand what this disease is and what it is not.
Yeah.
Helping yourself understand, how do I learn to walk in my loved one's truth, in their sense of reality, in how they interpret the world now, because all of that has changed.
And again, understanding that while you can't control the progression of this disease, you can control your emotions and how you are choosing to deal with that. And attitude, you say, is a big deal.
It is a very big deal. We hear people talk all the time out there in different genres about positive self-talk, right? But that is so true.
You're like, add it to the list, I'll try to get to it.
Exactly.
Right.
But that's so true when it comes to how your attitude and your mental, outlook on life and this journey that you're on so directly impacts your ability to survive it. And how you manage it, and how you're able to, creatively get yourself and your loved one through this process as best you can. So I always tell people, as a caregiver, in any particular moment, in any particular day, when you're getting to react to something that your loved one said or done, ask yourself, in this moment, is my attitude my friend or my foe? Okay?
Yeah.
If I say or do this thing, what is it going to create for my relationship with this loved one?
Are you just trying to get in a little zinger, right? A little
Right.
jab.
And it's because caregiving is such a hard and emotionally charged situation. Sometimes when we're tired, we've made a lot of sacrifices.
Say it loud for those in the back there.
And we're not taking care of ourselves the way we need to. A lot of times that attitude, and where that attitude is coming from, is about resentment. And look how you've changed my life. Okay. Now, although we love that person, that's human for us to do that. So the only way we can learn to manage that is to change what our attitude is about that whole process. And I said the other night when we were together with all those caregivers in that room, I said, in any given moment, my best advice to you would be, right now, in this moment in time, with what's happening with my loved one, what is the most loving and supportive thing I can say or do right now in this moment?
Yeah. Because you said there's a lot of fear.
There is a lot of fear.
That comes with this on both ends.
Absolutely.
And that's hard.
And a big piece of it that caregivers don't always understand for your loved one that's on this journey and is experiencing this whole illness is that there is so much fear and anxiety in them. One of the family members who came up to speak to us the other night said to me, Debbie, I can't even go to the bathroom by myself.
I know.
He won't give me even the space and time to do that in privacy. And, she was asking why is that happening? And, depending on where your loved one's at in this journey and how progressed they are, a big part of what they experience is this horrendous fear and anxiety that because I'm changing, because I'm not who I used to be in people's eyes, in the reality of how the disease is changing my sense of reality or my sense of myself, I am terrified that this person's going to abandon me.
Yeah.
They're just going to choose to up and leave. They're not going to love me anymore. Think about what a terrifying place that is.
And
to be.
just not understanding.
Right.
And I think also that's where the support comes in. That's where the family members come in. If you gotta be aware of where you're at. And sometimes it's your significant other or a family member who's able to say, you're a little close to the edge here.
Right.
But realizing that as a caregiver, you have to take care of yourself too.
You do.
So we don't get there, because then what's going to happen after you do say those things to your loved one who's with dementia? Then we're flooded with guilt, right? And then you feel sad, you feel bad. Will they remember this? Like, do they feel this? And at the end of the day, we're all just trying to do what we can. That exhaustion is going to hit.
Absolutely.
How do we have people in our corner to at least try to help that a little bit?
And so part of that is, just being really honest and open with other people about your fear, and really helping people understand your circumstance. It's important as caregivers, because we're so emotionally connected to the scenario in front of us. It's important that we reach out and get fresh eyes, get fresh perspective on what it is we're dealing with. That's one of the reasons why earlier we said, seek out people who are professionals, people who are experts, people who have a really deep knowledge and awareness of how this disease works and what it creates for people. And although your loved one is an individual and their journey may look different than, your neighbor down the road who's been diagnosed with dementia, there are some very, very big similarities. There are lots of things that people can teach you in regards to coping mechanisms and ways to change, how you react to things. As a caregiver, we have no control, no choice about the change that's happened to our loved ones. What we do have a choice about is how we allow ourselves to react to that change, and how we look at our attitude and our outlook on life from this point forward. That is a conscious choice.
You have here, what are some caregiver to-dos that are crucial to survival? What are some of those?
So one of the things I always ask people is, it's kind of thinking about, there's this concept out there. There was an author who wrote a book called How Full Is Your Bucket, right? And it's this analogy, if you will, that all of us walk through our lives with this bucket. And in our other hand, we have a dipper, right? And at any given time, we are either dipping out of other people's buckets and taking things out, or someone is taking their dipper and filling our bucket. Okay? Now what happens is, the more positive our outlook is, the more positive and kind that people are to you, the more complimentary, the more support, the more, all of those things just continue to fill your bucket, as well as how you take care of yourself, all right? So when you're nurturing yourself, when you're resting well, when you're eating well, when you're doing things that bring you joy and pleasure, all of those things put water in your bucket, if you will, okay? The problem is, as caregivers, we get caught in this mindset that it's all about sacrifice, give, and we have this overwhelming guilt about trying to take anything for ourselves.
Of course.
To the point where now we have caregivers not only with empty buckets, but they got holes punched in the bottom of their buckets, and now it won't even hold anything positive. Okay? So when we talk about caregiver to-dos and what are the critical things that you need to know to do, even though you don't feel like you want to do it, you need to make yourself this checklist and make sure that you're doing these things for yourself. Even when you don't feel like you should, The bottom line is, if you don't, you are not going to survive this process. You're not going to survive this journey. So the first one is stop thinking that being a caregiver means you have to sacrifice your own well-being.
Gotcha.
The bottom line is, I remember having this conversation with my mom when my dad was on this journey with his dementia. And I remember she was going through this process, this mental process of sacrificing, giving, never taking time off, never letting anybody else assist. And I finally said to her, Mom, how much do you love Dad? And I remember she got really tearful, and she talked about, well, what do you mean by that? You know how much I love your dad. I said, I do. But what happens, who's going to love him the way you do when you die because you've sacrificed everything you have to give and you can't go on anymore?
That's tough.
And so you really have to ask yourself, as a caregiver, if I don't take care of myself and I'm not here to do what this person, who will?
Yeah.
Who will care like I do? Who will love like I do? Who will serve this person like I do? So when you think about it like that, all of a sudden it isn't a choice to not take care of yourself.
Yeah, it's a priority.
It's a priority. You have to do that. And you just have to learn how to do that and be okay with it, okay? So the first thing I say to people all the time is take time to relax at some point in time every single day. It doesn't have to be for 4 hours at a time, but just take a breather.
Yeah.
Sit down, have a cup of tea, read 3 pages of your book, put on your incense and just relax, put your feet up. Find some period of time every single day where you can just take a step back and take a breather.
Yeah.
Okay? Maybe that's at some point in time when your loved one's taking a nap. You lay down, take a power nap for 30 minutes, whatever. But find time to just unplug and relax. Okay? You have to give yourself a timeout.
Yeah.
Right? Think about being a parent. Okay? When your kids got to the point where they just couldn't handle anymore, what did you do? Right? You either laid them down or you put them in a timeout, right? Yeah. Until they were able to get it back together and re-energize themselves. And that's really what we're talking about. Give yourself these little unplugged times from being a caregiver. And again, it might be 10 or 15 minutes. That's okay. There's no time frame on this. Yeah. Maybe you do 10 or 15 minutes 3 or 4 times a day. Oh, well, just think about that. That's a whole hour to yourself in the course of a day.
Love that. Right? Exactly. Yeah.
So just think about it. Don't think, we have a tendency again to think this all or nothing. It either has to be, a whole day that I can take off or it doesn't count. That's not true at all. It's the same way we get told all the time about exercise.
Yeah.
Just taking a 20 or 30-minute walk has an incredible impact.
Yeah.
Nobody's saying you got to go to the gym and work out for 3 hours,
Nope. Yeah.
So think about, again, these small bites versus these great big blocks of things. Next thing I would tell you is to keep a journal. People go, well, I'm not a writer. I don't know how to. It doesn't matter. All this is taking a pen to paper and writing down whatever you feel, whatever you're experiencing. The power of journaling, number one, is getting stuff from in here to out here.
Yeah.
And that in itself is so therapeutic.
Yeah.
It's just cathartic to do that.
Yeah.
The other thing that it does is over time, it helps you watch and gauge your own progress and how your feelings change and how you're coping and how your loved one is coping and what the responses are. So again, it's just about, it's not writing things down so you can say, oh, I did this wrong or
Remember
I did
you did that?
Right, exactly. It's not about keeping score at any point in time.
Yeah.
It really is just about helping you process and getting rid of all of that pent-up emotion and getting it out here. And it makes a complete difference when you can see something in black and white and you can remember in that moment of reading that how it felt.
Yeah. Yep.
It's so easy as a caregiver to get caught up in all the cycle of everything we experience that so much of it gets lost.
Yeah.
And it's so valuable to have that in writing as you move forward. The next thing I would tell you is to find what feeds your spirit. And what I mean by that is, what are the things that bring you serenity? What are the things that bring you peace? Okay? You've got to be able to find that space for yourself. Because again, this is, as we talked about earlier, such an emotionally charged and tumultuous kind of experience that you have to be able to find some space internally that brings you that feeling of settled and peaceful and, you know, serene kind of thing. Because the world around you isn't going to give you that. Okay? The reality that you live in is not calm. You know, lots of it is chaos. You know, and so it might be that you pray. You have a prayer time. It might be that you meditate somehow. It might be that, you know, you are connecting to nature and you just go sit on your deck at, you know, 5 o'clock in the morning and have your cup of coffee while your loved one is still sleeping, and you are just sitting out on your deck having an honest conversation with God, going, you know what, God, what I'm going through really sucks. And I'm really struggling, but I know that through you all things are possible. Just having that time to be able to express and find that settling peace that just kind of gives you what you need to move on through the rest of the day. Okay. Another thing I would say is that it's extremely important that you stay connected to other people. Too many times caregivers start to pull in and withdraw from friends and social circles that they've always had, because, you know, my husband and I always did this with all these other couples. Well, now we can't be a normal couple anymore, so they start to pull away. Don't do that. Maybe this isn't the same circle that you'll be connected to, but find people that you can connect to. It's one of the beauties about being part of a support group and walking with other people who are on this journey. You need to be connected. You need to have life beyond, you know, this here and now that you're dealing with 24/7. And you need to know you're not the only one experiencing this. You're not in this by yourself. There are other people who are walking this. The beauty of a support group is, you know, there are other people who have already walked where you're walking right now. I can't tell you how therapeutic it is to be with people who have walked where you're walking, and you can see, hey, they're doing pretty good. They didn't crash and burn.
They're like, hold on, you're almost there.
They didn't spontaneously combust, you know, on the process. So it's really important that you stay connected. You know, it's important that you create community around yourself. You know, whether that's a church community, that's family, that's friends, whoever, your support group, whoever that might be, but you've got to stay connected to that social support, okay? And then the other thing I will tell you is feed the child in you. Do the things that you enjoy. This disease is very, very difficult, very destructive in its nature. And so, as we talked about just a few minutes ago, finding joy in that journey is hard. So you got to find joy that feeds your inner child somewhere. What gives you happiness? What gives you fun? What gives you just the ability to let go and be crazy? Okay? You need those outlets to feed and nurture who you are as a caregiver in order to continue to be able to give what you need to give.
Gosh, there's just so much that goes along with being a caregiver. Again, just knowing that you're not alone. Other people have gone through this. More people will continue, but there's always help. There's always references out there. Because this is a lot to tackle, and it's a lot to change.
And the bottom line is, it comes down to you as a caregiver making that choice of understanding, am I going to have the courage to let go of that what was and to fully embrace the new what is. Am I going to be able to have the courage to love without limits, to be able to, be strong enough to be okay with who this person is in front of me right now? That's a tough choice to make, but it's also probably the most freeing thing you can do as a caregiver.
Support for the Living Wisdom podcast is provided by InTouch Pharmaceuticals, a long-term care pharmacy committed to meeting the specialized pharmaceutical needs of their clients. Visit intouchpharma.com.